Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. People didn't know. That night, what I buried wasn't shoes, it was evidence. Snow piled on my shoulders, and my heart beat hard like a northern military song. Inside those shoes lay a torn scrap of scripture. It was my faith and someone's death sentence. Each time the dawn wind passed, the earth there flinched. And I bit my lip instead of praying. She buried it, and she never came back. I worked at a small elementary school in downtown Hamheung. In winter, frost bloomed on the window panes, and the classrooms were always thick with the smell of coal. Every day the children tied on their red scarves, opened their workbooks, and shouted slogans. Long live the great leader. Even in that chorus, I sometimes felt one child's gaze. A girl with neatly braided black hair. Her name was Eun-ju. She was always quiet. Even when she stood at the chalkboard, she never raised her voice. And she often scribbled tiny lines in the corners of her notebook. Curious, I stole a glance. Light shines in the darkness. My heart trembled, just a little. That sentence wasn't in any textbook. The air at school was always taut. A thought inspection chart hung on the staff room wall. And every week there was a loyalty assessment. Some received a perfect score, and some disappeared. In such a world, a single line of writing, a bar of song, could change a life. I knew that. That December, Eun-ju always slipped away behind the playground after school. A narrow path led beneath a snow-covered hill. No one went there. If you followed it at night, there was an old shed. Light leaked through the door crack. And from inside came a low, trembling voice. Hallowed be your name. I held my breath. It was a prayer, unmistakably. Here, even a single line like that could get you arrested. From behind the door I listened to her voice. I heard another person's breathing too. Maybe 2 or 3 of them. They didn't sing the hymn aloud. They moved their lips in silence. Perhaps that's why the prayer sounded even stronger. I tried to turn away. But then my shadow wavered across the snow. It passed through the crack where the light bled out. The door opened a little. And Eun-ju's eyes found me. Surprise, fear, and a certain resolve mixed in her gaze. Teacher, did you hear that? Her voice shook, but she didn't hide. I couldn't say anything. My lips felt frozen, refusing to move. It's just a song. Nothing at all. When she said that, I knew exactly what it meant. It was not an excuse, it was a confession. That night, even back in my quarters, the sound stayed in my ears. Snow fell, and the wind scratched the window. I turned off the light and sat in the dark. And I wondered, why would that child accept the risk? It felt less like ideology than a survival instinct. In that dim light, what she was protecting was not freedom, but a reason to exist. A few days later, the principal issued a new directive. There is someone singing strange songs in the school. Be careful and report it. The moment I heard that voice, I couldn't breathe. He had tossed out suspicion and was waiting for evidence. If anyone spoke up, it was over. After class that day, Eun-ju came to me and quietly asked, Teacher, will spring come even underground covered with snow? Her eyes did not waver. I couldn't look away. Someday, it will. As I said it, I felt the lie. She smiled. Then I'm all right. That night I stood again before the shed. No sound came from inside. I opened the door, and a small pair of shoes sat in the corner. Wet footprints, melting snow, led up to them. I stood there for a long time. I didn't yet know what those shoes meant. She used those shoes to go and pray. And I used those shoes to learn fear. And that day was the beginning of everything. After that, I watched Eun-ju every day. She hardly spoke in class. While the children laughed and chattered, she quietly straightened her notebooks. There was always a worn bag beneath her desk. And inside it, a small notebook was hidden. I knew what it was, and pretended I didn't. Even so, the pressure tightened around my heart. The atmosphere at school was slowly changing. One day, a state security agent visited. A man in a black cap opened the staff room door and said, There's someone in this area spreading impure ideas. With that one sentence, the air froze. The principal sprang up and echoed, "There's no such person in our school." But there was no conviction in his voice. All day, Eun-ju stared out the window. Snow fell, frost on the glass began to melt. My heart pounded. I knew she was in danger. Her footprints had already sunk too deep into the snow. Night came, and light leaked from the end of the corridor. It was her room. The door was slightly open, and inside I heard the sound of paper tearing. I eased the door wider. A Bible lay in pieces on the desk, and she was folding the torn scraps one by one. "We have to share these." She whispered it low. My body went rigid at her words. If the children read them someday they'll understand. Her hands trembled, yet her eyes were strangely calm. I lowered my voice. "This could get you killed." She nodded. "I know. But if no one's willing to die, then faith dies instead." That night, she tucked the paper scraps into a pair of shoes. They were small, worn rubber shoes. "This is safest. Nobody looks inside shoes." She smiled. It was a strangely sad smile. I stared at the shoes. What they hid was not just paper, it was life. A few days later, the shoes were gone. Behind the school we found only a single shoe of the same kind. Inside was a damp sheet of paper. "God is our refuge and strength." The letters had run, but I could still read them. I clenched the paper in my hand. My fingertips felt frozen. Footsteps approached. I shoved the paper into my pocket. The next morning, the principal gathered everyone in the yard. "If you've seen forbidden booklets or papers, report them at once." His voice boomed through the loudspeakers. The children glanced at one another, gauging the air. Then Eun-ju stepped forward one pace. And said nothing. She only bowed her head. Her silence was so vast that even the wind seemed to stop. That evening she was summoned to the staff room. And she didn't return. Her room was empty, and nothing remained on the desk. But I knew. She hadn't vanished. Her shoes, her papers, they were still somewhere. A few days later, a small envelope appeared on the classroom window frame. No name on it. Inside, in a firm, pressed hand, a short line. "When the snow melts, you'll know where I am." I read it and couldn't speak. While the snow kept falling, I turned the words over and over. When the snow melts. It meant spring. She had gone, but left a promise. That promise was heavier than paper. That night I went behind the classroom and quietly pulled out a pair of shoes. They were smeared with dirt, and inside was another sheet of paper. "Do not be afraid, for I am with you." The moment I read it, something in me collapsed. Tears fell, and the paper grew wet. All that remained where she disappeared were the shoes. But I knew. There was truth tucked inside them. And someday, that truth would step out and walk again. After Eun-ju disappeared, the school grew strangely quiet. Slogans pasted along the corridors fluttered in the draft, and instead of children's laughter, report and inspection echoed in my ears. Some said she had fled to the south. Others whispered she'd been taken by security. But I didn't believe it. She wasn't someone who ran. She was someone who kept. Since then, I woke at night again and again. If I opened the window, I could see the playground. And there were always footprints in the snow. Someone seemed to walk there each night. They always led the same way, toward the old shed behind the school. I felt it wasn't just the work of the wind. For days, the tracks didn't vanish. Even when fresh snow fell, they reappeared, as if someone were leaving them on purpose. Night after night I gripped the window frame. My heart hammered. Then, at some point, a nameless impulse moved me. I pulled on my coat and went outside. The snowfield was quiet. Each breath floated as a pale mist. The prints were clear, stretching far ahead. I followed them. The winter air was cold and heavy. Moonlight skimmed the frozen earth, drawing fainter shadows. At the end of the shadows stood the old shed. I pushed the door. Darkness swallowed me. Inside was empty, but something was carved into one wall. When I traced it with my fingers, I felt the rough, deep grooves. God is alive. My fingers shook. The letters looked hastily scratched. It was her last trace. I stood there for a long time. Time seemed to stop. Wind slipped through the crack and dust drifted. Then footsteps sounded behind me. A chill climbed my spine. I turned. Someone stood in the doorway. A state security officer. "What are you doing here at this hour?" I steadied my breath. "I came to tidy up the records." He narrowed his eyes and walked in slowly. "What's this?" His gaze moved to the carved words. I swallowed. My vision blurred. For an instant, it felt like everything would end. He stared at the letters a moment, then said, "Let's say this was never here." And he closed the door and left. I sank to the floor. It was not a threat, it was a warning. From now on, I was the one under watch. A few days later, a new teacher arrived. People called him the guidance officer. He sat at my desk and flipped through documents. What kind of person was this teacher, Eun-ju? My fingertips trembled at the question. Diligent. Quiet. He nodded. The quiet ones are the most dangerous. After that, I felt eyes in the crack of my door. At night, a faint radio-like static rose outside the window. And in the mornings, strange footprints marked my threshold. They were watching me, and I began to hide what remained of her. Her notebook, paper scraps, a single shoe. I buried them under my bed. Each night I laid my hand over them and prayed. If one of us is taken first, let the truth not be erased. Tears came every time the words left my mouth. Then one day, I heard an odd sound at the end of the hall. Talk, talk, measured footsteps. I opened the door. No one was there, but the floor was speckled with wet drops like tears. They weren't footprints. They were her shadow. After that, I couldn't sleep. At night I heard a faint song from the shed's direction. The light shines in the darkness. It was the last line she'd left me. I listened with my eyes closed. Fear and longing tangled together. Her shoes were gone, but her footsteps still walked inside my heart. That winter was unusually long. Snow fell without end, and the city lost its sound. Security's raids grew fiercer. Before dawn, someone was dragged away. The shed near the school was sealed. Each day I choked on fear. But at night, her song still flowed in my ears. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't stop thinking of the place where her shoes must be buried. It felt as if something under the snow was still calling me. I couldn't bear it any longer. I had to protect her trace. Whatever came, I had to guard those shoes. That night, I left the school. The sky was packed with low clouds, and snowflakes settled noiselessly. I carried a shovel in my hand. Footprints trailed behind the shed. It was the path from the day she vanished. Step by step, I followed it. Wind slapped my face. My breath froze white. Each crunch of snow beneath my feet sounded like someone whispering, "Do not be afraid." It was her voice. Or maybe a hallucination my mind created. Either way, I couldn't go on without it. Behind the shed lay a small hill. The snow piled there bulged oddly. I knelt down with care. When I brushed aside the snow, my palm hit something hard. Soil. Under the frozen ground, something seemed to be breathing. The shovel blade split the earth and a dull glint reflected. A worn pair of rubber shoes emerged. Snow and dirt caked them. Inside were scraps of paper. I lifted them out with my fingers. The ink had bled, but a few letters remained. Truth, even buried, does not disappear. My fingertips shook. Then I heard footsteps in the distance. Instinctively I hunched down. A patrolman. His flashlight swept the snow. I clutched the shoes to my chest and held my breath. "Who's there?" His voice cracked short through the air. Snow gusted. I didn't move. I heard the cold metal of a gun. For a moment, my heart stopped. "What were you burying?" "Snow, sir." My lips were so numb they barely moved. He stared at me for a moment, then lowered the gun. "You saw nothing tonight. Understood?" "Yes." He turned his back. The footsteps faded, and only the wind remained. I buried the shoes again. I covered them with snow and prayed quietly. Let her faith remain on this ground. The snowfall thickened. The world turned white. After a moment, I stood. I could no longer feel my fingertips. My breath rose pale above the snow. Her shoes were now fully hidden. And on top of them, new footprints appeared. They were mine. From that day, I called the hill the place of worship. In secret, I passed it each day. Sometimes a low murmur rose from beneath the snow. Her praying voice. Whenever that happened, I stopped and whispered, "Eun-ju, you are free now." When winter broke, the city's noise began to creep back. Icicles ticked from eaves, and the smell of firewood spread over the old lanes. As the ice sheets vanished from the schoolyard, the earth's scent rose. I went to work as if nothing had changed. Someone whispered that everything had. Security patrols thinned, but people's eyes still held a frozen tension. Spring staggered in, somewhere between vigilance and release. The hill shed its snow and changed expression. The once cold soil now warmed my palm when I touched it. And the places left empty by what had vanished filled with small, tender things. The first to rise was a sprout, a little heart of nameless grass. I crouched there for a long time, watching. It wavered, unsure of direction, then lifted its head toward the light. When the principal ordered us to prepare a spring picnic, my pencil halted over the calendar. The suggested site was that very hill. The children cheered. Damp air made the classroom feel light. I closed my eyes for a moment. I hoped the place was no longer only a secret we had to hide. The morning of the picnic, the sky was clear. Children ran with their lunch pails, pink scarves fluttering in the spring wind. I walked slowly behind them. On the hill, they scattered and sat, and someone ran down and picked a small flower. I couldn't stop them. The thought came that perhaps life touching life is its own form of worship. A new transfer girl approached me carefully. Her shoes looked familiar somehow. Not because they were worn, but because of a tiny scar across the instep and the crooked heel that tugged at my memory. I lowered my head as if idly, then asked softly, "Where did you get those shoes?" She hesitated and looked away. "Mother said a friend gave them to us." Her words hung in the air like dust motes. I didn't ask more. Sometimes keeping is more important than knowing. Near lunchtime, a small commotion. The transfer girl dropped a folded paper from her bag, and the wind rolled it down the hill. I ran down on instinct. Dust smeared the sheet, but the letters were clear. The light shines in the darkness. My fingertips went cold. When I smoothed the line with my thumb, the paper trembled. I turned to the girl. She bit her lip with frightened eyes. "Where did you learn this?" "I don't know. It's just sometimes mom like she's talking to herself." She couldn't finish. I folded the paper and slipped it into my breast pocket. Then drew a slow breath. It felt as if Eun-ju's breath had returned on the spring wind. That afternoon, while the children played tag, I climbed to the spot at the top of the hill. The soil I'd covered all winter with my palm no longer felt rough. It loosened like soft scales sifting through my fingers. A very small wildflower had bloomed there. 3 petals each time the breeze nudged it once. It seemed to gaze back at me. I knelt before it. "You're back." The words were short, but enough to end the winter inside me. When the picnic ended and the children went home, I stayed alone. The sun leaned west and the hill's shadows stretched long. The city noise receded and the birds grew sharper. I carefully turned a little soil and laid a small stone there. It was too tiny to draw notice, but to me it was a signal as clear as a map. I set my hand over the stone like a breath and prayed slowly. Hardly any words came. I'd learned that prayer becomes exact when it runs out of words. Then footsteps. I snatched back my hand and stood. The guidance officer waited at the foot of the hill. He looked at me a moment, lit a cigarette without a word. Smoke pressed low in the wind and then vanished. He didn't climb. He tugged his cap down and turned away. His back looked strangely tired. In that instant I understood. Surveillance is also human work, and human work has an end. As the sun slipped further, the hill's warmth fled quickly. I took the paper from my pocket and read it one last time. The light shines in the darkness. Halfway through the line, I heard quiet footsteps far off. I didn't turn. Whether those steps were real or only an echo of memory didn't matter. This place no longer meant her absence, it meant someone's arrival. Footprints would keep gathering, until one day they overlapped mine and formed a deeper path. Night fell. The city lit itself slowly, the hill withdrew into the dark. I pressed the tiny stone down with my fingertip to fix it in place. Then I made a promise in my heart. To no one, and yet impossible to erase. I will keep this place. It would be a way of living, not a vow. On the way home, another set of footsteps followed mine. I did not slow down on purpose. The steps held steady, then thinned and were gone. It was a sign that unease hadn't ended. But not a shadow large enough to cancel today's spring. Spring had already begun, and what begins will someday arrive. That single truth pressed warm against my back like body heat. Before I touched the door handle, I looked up. Starlight blurred faintly, clouds drifted south. I opened a window I'd kept shut all winter, just a crack. A low, coughing sort of breeze seeped into the room. I spread a sheet on the desk and wrote a single line with my pencil. Truth, even buried, does not disappear. I made the dots small and the strokes careful. I didn't cover the sentence. Not covering it meant I was preparing the next one. And the next sentence was already decided. Tomorrow morning, in the smell of soil in the schoolyard. Hidden behind the children's laughter. On the narrow path that leads to the hill. I turned off the light and closed my eyes. The dark filled the room, but not only the dark. A very soft song brushed my ear. Do not be afraid. The voice seemed far away, and then trembling right at my lips. I didn't try to catch that tremor. Even so, it stayed in me. Spring had come, and I would walk this road, from the hill back home, for a long time. Following someone's footprints, leaving my own. At the end of that road, we will recognize one another. Even without words, we will. People still call that place just the empty hill. But I know better. 2 pairs of shoes lie buried there, facing each other. One is hers, and the other is mine, the one I covered that night. Each spring, wild grass veils the spot. When it rains, the earth darkens. And when the sun strokes it, it shines again. I watch that change every year. Some say it's nothing but the cycle of seasons. But to me, it's a kind of worship. People ask, why did she take such a risk? I don't answer. Because the moment I answer, the story ends. Her choice wasn't something to interpret, it was a life lived. Some hid, some spoke. She buried. And that burial was the greatest confession I've ever seen. Sometimes the wind lifts the soil a little. Seeds of field grass slip into the gap. And small life grows again. Whenever I see it, I understand. Faith isn't a granite rock. It's soil that keeps rising softly, alive. One day a child asked me, "Teacher, why is there a little stone on the hill?" I smiled a moment. So no one loses the way. The child nodded. For whom? For the one who's waiting for someone. At sunset, the hill turns gold. If the light glitters so bright I have to close my eyes. Her footprints appear again, the slender trace across the snow. And the place where it stops. I am still standing there. With time, names will fade. Memories will thin, but truth will not. Truth does not rot even when it's buried beneath the soil. Her shoes prove that. They were not death. They were evidence. Even today I pass that hill. When I see new footprints, I step down over them slowly. Quietly, so they make no sound. It's my courtesy and my faith. Someday someone else will walk this road. They won't know me, but they'll set their feet over mine. And beneath them, they'll feel that the shoes buried long ago are still warm. She hid the shoes, but faith was never hidden. Thank you for watching this story.